welcome to our show. I'm Ann Curran, Executive Director of the Armonk Outdoor Art Show, and we're celebrating our 59th annual show. This is the very first time we have put on a virtual show. Our annual outdoor show is sponsored by the Friends of the North Castle Public Library, and net proceeds support our local libraries, funding educational and entertainment programs for all ages, and the Armonk Players, our local theater group. This year, we gratefully acknowledge our sponsors who have made the online show possible. All community donations, even an amount similar to our usual entrance fee, is appreciated. You can donate easily through our website, armonkoutdoorartshow.org, and help to keep us going strong for next year. Our full online schedule has a great selection of videos on demand, including artist galleries, studio tours, and demos, as well as live programs like this one. I also encourage you to explore the work of all 160 juried artists on the exhibitor pages of our website. We're offering ways to connect directly with our artists this year, to inquire, and to hopefully be inspired to purchase some fabulous art. So now let's get to our program. Susan Goldstein is with us. She is art director of our show, and she's assisting today in monitoring questions that you can type into the chat. Susan will give Louis questions as time allows. Our host artist, Louis F. Pérez, is a former illustrator art director for Polo Ralph Lauren and a teacher of drawing and painting. Louis now works full-time on creating and exhibiting his art at outdoor shows around the country. While he's proficient in many mediums, his mediums of choice are transparent watercolors and drawing with charcoal, graphite, or color pencils. We'll get a glimpse at his work in his studio and watch his demonstration on creating movement in charcoal drawing. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the program. Hello, Louis.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to my studio. My name is Louis Pérez. I am so happy to be able to show you my studio and my work and actually share part of me and how I actually create some of my drawings. I do want to thank Anne. I want to thank Susan for this opportunity. And Susan, thank you for being my monitor, my chat monitor. And I also want to do a shout out to all the wonderful volunteers of the Armonk Show who make this possible, this wonderful event that artists love to come to. We're treated very well. Sponsors, thank you so much for this. We all really appreciate it, especially in such a rough, tough year for artists. So I've been doing the art show for about 4 years, I think. I think this might be my 5th. And I've always exhibited in 2 mediums, transparent watercolor and drawing. So right now I am going to show and share with you my watercolors and my drawings. This piece is 11 inches by 30 inches. It's entitled Farnese Barn Door Number 2. It's entirely in watercolor. There's no white paint on it. And it was inspired by a trip I made to Italy in a town called Farnese. A shout out to my friend, Will McCarthy. He actually ran a workshop over there and it was wonderful. And this is where I got a lot of great photographs. Next is this drawing of an elephant. This is actually this was like working in a negative or in an opposite of what we usually do. It started out as an experiment. This is rendered with white chalk or white pastel on black board. And it's one of those experiments that turned out to be pretty good. Great results. This drawing is called Repose. It's 16 inches by 42 inches, and it's rendered entirely in graphite on paper. I don't smudge when I use graphite. I use all the pencils that I can get my hands on to render whatever I need to render in the right tones I need to do. This bottom drawing or painting is a new one. It's a series of watercolors that I will be doing about food, and it's entitled Privileged Food Number 1. And it's a statement on how we are a very rich nation, but at the same time, we are malnourished. Many people do not get to eat properly. So there's a little food for thought. And then this one was rendered in the same way as the elephant. This one's called Arabian number 4, 16 by 20, and is white pastel or white charcoal on black board. This watercolor was inspired by a picture that I took in New Orleans. And it's entitled Painting His Life Away. And it's 7 inches by 10 inches. And if you notice, one of the things I like to do quite often is sometimes I leave things out. I don't have to paint things in all the time. I believe that you as a viewer can fill in the gaps. You can have your own interpretations. And also it's a question of design, and I am a big believer of negative space, which I'll explain in more detail later, but negative space is very important to me. This piece, also a watercolor, 7 by 10, was also taken based on a photograph taken in New Orleans. And this one is entitled, There's No Higher Religion Than Human Service. To work for the common good is the greatest creed, which is a quote by Woodrow Wilson. And Lord knows that we do need a creed nowadays. And the last ones I want to show you is it's my flamenco series, which they're drawings, and I emphasize movement. But I also have this opportunity to show you how an artist's style or vision evolves based on what he or she is doing. So this is my first ritual fire dance drawing. You can see that it's a little designy. There isn't much detail on the bottom. But as the title says, Ritual Fire Dance, I wanted to give a feeling of flames moving upwards from the bottom. And there isn't much movement other than on the bottom and the texture in the background. And then I evolved to doing this. There's also a flamenco dancer. This is 30 by 22. It's charcoal on white paper, which is very difficult to do actually, to try to keep the paper as clean as possible. And this is where I really started to realize I can do something with movement. And if you notice, there isn't much going on in the background, which I think it emphasizes the movement of this figure, being that the background is static. And then I am finally evolving to doing these. They're a little more graphic, a little more powerful, high contrasts. In this work, I spent a lot of time rendering the details of what makes something look blurry or the movement. And in order to get this done, I need to have something that we can recognize as static. And that shoe, without that shoe, we really would not be able to see that we have a dancer. And in this case, again, the background is really important to me. I know for people who say, well, it looks just black, but that's the negative space. And I love the negative space. Without it, I don't think any artwork actually can work. If you could imagine just cutting out the entire figure, which is supposed to be the subject, if you take that out, that background should still work as a nice piece of art. And now I'm going to show you how I proceed for my artwork. You can just bear with me as I set up.
Hey, Louis. It's
Yes,
Susan.
Susan.
Someone would like to know, while you're setting up, I thought maybe I'll throw this one question out to you. Whether you're drawing a face of an animal or a person, someone says, I've read it's easier to draw a face upside down rather than right side up. Do you work that way? And do you?
Okay, so drawing with the left side of your brain had these wonderful exercises. Let's see if I can. Bear with me, I almost got it. Has wonderful exercises for you to draw and to change the way that you see. So when I teach drawing, when I have taught drawing, I do a couple of exercises that I learned from that book also. One of them is drawing upside down. I usually don't do that. Once in a while, I will try to do it if I am stuck, but I usually don't. I tend to trust my instinct and the training I've had, or I continue to do. And what I usually do, if anything, is I usually take the reference and the drawing, if they're small enough, and I will go in front of a mirror and look at them. And they should look a little bit similar. There's some similarities. But yes, if you can draw upside down, that helps a lot. And again, it's important to know the difference between looking and seeing. Artists need to see. They can't just look. And seeing means that you need to be able to measure in proportions, distance, the thickness of something, the thinness, in relation to what's adjacent to it. So I hope that helps in that, but that is a good book, Drawing with the Left Side of Your Brain. It has wonderful exercises. One of the other things I used to do with my students is have them draw with the hand that they do not write with. And that is a great exercise because now you really are forced to concentrate on seeing and making sure it's what you're putting down on the paper is very accurate. So how I get started, I have photographs that I took, and I go into Photoshop and I manipulate the photographs. I cut, crop, I take backgrounds out. I might add more blur motion to it. I do design it. I cut things in and out. So I do a lot of work on the computer, which is a nice tool to have because in the old days, we used to do a lot of work on sketchbooks and tracing paper, and you would do it over and over again until you get what you wanted. So once I have the image I like, that I find interesting, then I got to decide what size I'm going to do. I usually like to work a little bit large, and they usually size 20 by 30 or 22 by 30. But for today's demonstration, I'm using just an 8 by 12 inch paper. I usually work on white paper, but for the sake of the demo and saving time, I used a gray paper so that we can get a little bit of time saving in toning and shading. So how do I transfer the image, the reference, to the paper? Well, there are 2-3 ways you can do that. If the paper is thin enough, you can use a light box and you can trace it. The other way is you can transfer it by putting, for example, charcoal on the back, putting that on your paper, and then drawing over the outlines. And it would look something like this. I don't know if you can see it too clearly, but they're just hard lines. And it just designates more or less where things are. Or you can do it freehand the way I've been doing it this morning. And it's a little bit harder, but at the same time, it's also part of the training. This is how you continue to grow. So I spend a lot of time looking at the reference, and I look, for example, I'm drawing this part. Well, I want to see what's the distance here, what shape I can create here that is similar. And then I try to imitate that. So it's all about shapes, very simple shapes, squares, rectangles, triangles, and circles. So drawing it freehand, it's a wonderful exercise, but when you're on a deadline, sometimes it's more complicated because this is my design. This is what I want. I usually work in the rule of thirds, it's called, which photographers use quite often. And it basically is a rule where you divide the paper into thirds. It's almost like tic-tac-toe. Let me read. And what you really want to do is you want to try to avoid where you would put the circle and the X's, because that's really bad design. You don't want your main subject, your focal point there. It's just kind of not a good design idea. But what you do want is you want them along these lines, the lines that divide things up into thirds. So when you go into an art show and you're interested in buying an art piece, check out one of these things. See if this is a good way to check out if it's a good design or not. There are other ways of composing. And you do want, ideally, to get your focal point of interest for the drawing or the painting where the lines do intersect. But as long as they're on the line, we're good. So the materials, yes.
I'm sorry. Someone would like to know this image that you're working from. It looks like an eye or a hand. What was your original image that you started with before you went into Photoshop?
Okay, so this is the image that I took. So I took a trip to Seville, Spain on a tour. And part of the tour, we had the opportunity to go to Palacio Andaluz, which is a theater that promotes flamenco. And we were able to have front row seats, take photographs, and take photographs with flash. So when I got back to the US, I had almost 2,000 photographs. The sad thing about it is like 99% of the photographs were all bad. They were all blurry. So I thought, I can't do much with this. So I was ready to delete them when it occurred to me that on for example, one of the first drawings I showed you, the Solear, is the man spinning. That's actually what was on my photograph. And I thought that would be interesting. So I before I deleted, I had them all selected and ready to delete. I decided to see what would happen what if. And I started to eliminate the background and to mess around with the edges on the drawing. I'm sorry, on the photograph. And I like what I got. And so most of the time when I am doing these, this is a flamenco dancer. This is her head. Somewhere in here is her nose. That's her mouth. This is her eyes. And she is moving. So that's why you have the blur. Her hands up here. And this is what they call a manton. This is like a shawl that the dancers use to spin around. So all of these things is what you're seeing. And this is her arm in motion. And it's all going on pretty fast. So usually some of the pictures, most of the pictures are already blurry because they were quote unquote bad pictures. But I got to save them, and I'm making lemonade nowadays. So anyway, so drawing directly takes a little more time. It makes for being more careful. You have to measure quite a bit. And by measuring, I mean it's like, for example, if I want to know the distance from this point to this point, I can use my pencil. I can just bring it down, and I will know that I'm kind of pretty close to that. So anyway, so you can draw it freehand. It takes more time, but it's wonderful training. And one, as an artist, should always continue to draw and paint. It just never ends, and you're never good until people tell you you are. So from here, I'm going to move on to the next step. I did a little bit more work. So as the drawing evolves, I'm blocking things in. And by blocking, I mean is like you take big chunks of charcoal. I will talk about my materials in a minute, and or white. And you kind of block things in. So you get an idea of what's going on, where things more or less will fall. And as I said earlier, I'm a big fan of negative space. So this is I'm going to outline this.
Louis, what type of charcoal do you use? Do you use pencils or, I mean, I see pencils, but other kinds of charcoal?
Yes. So let me see, do we see it? I'm going to move the camera a little bit. So these are my whites. There's these things called white charcoal, which is an oxymoron. I always have a hard time with that. There's white sticks. There's a white pastel. These are stumps, and I have boxes full of them. They come in different shapes and sizes, and they do have very good, wonderful purpose. You can get in there really close to the edges and smudge. You could also draw with them. I sometimes take charcoal. I just rub the tip on it in case I want to get close and just do some subtle tones. Something the pencil or the vine cannot do. I have pencils in this case, and they're all different hardness. They go from HB to 6B. And what this means is hard, soft. So it's kind of in the middle. The harder the pencil, the less charcoal it will release. This one's a medium or 2B. So this is a little bit softer than the HB. And here I have 4Bs and 6Bs. I also use vines. So they're just sticks of charcoal, and they're great for big areas. You cover a lot of ground. The other thing they are good, most of the time they're very soft. So they're easy to manipulate. And they do release a lot of charcoal. So it can get pretty messy very quickly. But these are wonderful. And then I do use something called charcoal powder. Different ways of using this. I can dip a brush in it, and I can just spread it. And there's just a synthetic brush, and you can create a lot of effects with this. I sometimes just use my finger to create this interesting, almost like a flower effect.
I have two questions for you. One person would like to know, what do you use to sharpen the charcoal?
Good. So just to finish off, I use pencils, sticks, vines, and sometimes I use the powder. And then to spread the charcoal, I can use a finger, and each one has a different effect at the end. You already introduced you to these. They do have a different effect again. Some are easier. They allow for smoother gradations. And you can use paper towels, you can use Kleenex, toilet paper, cotton, and each one will have a different purpose and effect. So what do I use to sharpen? Three things actually. I do use a sharpener, regular pencil, not regular, a high-end pencil sharpener, especially with the soft charcoals and the white, because they are soft and they do break easily. So I do get a bit of a fine point with the pencil sharpener. If I need to refine them, there's these sanding pads that you can buy. These are like $2 each. And you can, let's use this one. You can start to file pretty much that, or you can buy the real fancy ones. These are wonderful. These are more aggressive. but at the same time gives you more space, and you can clean these off very quickly and reuse them. And then the other way to do it is you take a blade and you actually just cut as much of the wood off to extend and expose as much of the charcoal, and you go back to this. Now the difference with this and this is that this allows me more opportunity to do more flexible work. I can go in with detailed work on this, but I could also do broader work, broader shading, quicker drawings. This one, I can do the detail, but I don't have as much charcoal exposed to cover more ground. So the paper I'm using today is not white, it's pastel paper. It is my tanned paper, and it's specifically for charcoal. And if you can see, there's these little holes. That's the tooth of the paper. When you work with powdery medium, you want more tooth so that the powder, as it gets released, gets embedded inside the holes. If you do it on a regular smooth paper, the charcoal, the powder would not hold, it will just float, and even a little breeze will just blow everything away. So let me continue showing you how I do this. I block everything in, so I know pretty much, I have an idea where things are. And then at some point, I start going into details. I would start working in one area. So I'm going to select this area for now. So I'm going to delineate this a little bit better. And this is where I can just stay all day zenning away, because this just, I find it mesmerizing and meditative. The process of not thinking, of no thought, I should say, it's just easier to practice with these. Then, of course, once in a while, you have to like snap out of it and realize that you want it to look a little bit of like what your reference looks like. One of the nice things about doing this kind of work is I don't have to be married, so to speak, to the photograph or the reference. I can improvise as I go along, and I can redesign as I go along. So unlike a portrait, for example, you want a portrait to look like the person or the pet, actually, since there are portraits of pets done, and houses nowadays. You want it to look like that. But in this case, what I don't want it to look like is movement. So I move that away, take a good look. And now, just to go back for a moment, this is my design. See this space back here? This is really important to me. This is the negative space. And not only that, these little pockets as well. If we were to cut this out and leave the dark spaces in, those spaces should work out nicely. There we go. Nicely without the subject.
So Louis, how do you make this permanent? Because there's a lot of charcoal dust kind of on top. How do you?
So there are two ways to attack this. So if and when I finish a particular area, you can get something called workable fixative. And what it does is you spray it and it leaves some room for you to be able to erase anything that you need to lift. And it also kind of protects it a little bit more, but it's not permanent. But it's better than not having anything on. The other way to do it is like what I'm doing is I'm going to be finishing things. I want to cover the paper. And notice that I lift when I move it. I don't slide it across, because charcoal does accumulate underneath. And if you slide it, you will smudge whatever you're working on. So when I teach art, it doesn't matter if it's painting or drawing. I like to expose my students to something that we all understand and we get it very quickly, and it's yin yang. So for one thing, there's an equal opposite. So there's black and white, which is a simple one. There is hot and cold. And I always want my students to think in those terms. When it comes to drawing and painting, you want to have a balance of hard and soft. So right now, I'm going to be working in an area where I want to have something delineated, but then it's going to move into something much softer. And you have to have both. If you're going to go look at a photograph, look at paintings, and even sculptures that you're interested in buying, keep in mind that the artwork should contain elements of hard and soft. If it's all hard, very rarely does it really work. Does it have an appeal? But there are other things you need to consider as well. So if it's a painting with color, well, you want to consider the balance of hot colors, warm colors, and cool colors. You need one in order to have the other. So the same thing with edges. In order to have a hard edge, you need a soft adjacent tone or gray. So I usually like to keep my stuff organized because I like to reach out quickly and not go through piles of pencils for the right one that I'm looking for. I usually organize them in a sense that I have hard pencils on one side, hard medium separated from that, and the soft ones separated as well. And that just makes it easier, especially since it's such a messy medium. It helps to be somewhat clean and organized. One of the things I like to have around, because sometimes you need to stop very quickly, you need to move on, is baby wipes. They're wonderful for taking the charcoal off your hands. They work better. It works better than soap and water in most cases. Okay, so I just start moving into areas of detail. Rework edges. And as I move along, I always have to be aware of the tones, because the tones change a lot. So by tones, I don't mean the color. I mean the amount of darkness and lightness. Now, there isn't much white in here, but I'm taking the liberty to make these more light because my background is going to be black. And going back to the point of yin yang, if you have black, you should have some white in there somewhere, and vice versa. So I love this little thing. It looks like a mop, and I do use it to spread and mop around more charcoal.
Do you ever have an area where all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, it got too dark and I need to remove some of the color? Can you do that?
All right, so I'll be honest, when I work on white paper, I avoid that altogether as much as possible. The papers that I use, they're printmaker papers. They have a little bit of tooth, but they're also very fragile in a sense that once you put a line down, it kind of stays. And I can erase all I want, but there's what I call a ghost line. You'll always see a little line left. With pastel paper and some other boards, you can actually go in and erase, which is fantastic. It just saves it, and you can also just go back in and go over it without too much issue. So it depends a great deal on the material you're using. With graphite pencils, it's almost the same issue. I try to draw very softly initially. I do measure the tones, as I move along. I try not to go dark very quickly. Usually I leave darkest darks for the very, very last. It's almost the same way I work with watercolors. Since my watercolors are transparent, I don't usually like to start with the darkest because it's sometimes very difficult to remove if I need to make a correction. So anyway, let me just continue with this just for another few seconds. And then we'll move to the next stage because it's amazing how time flies when you're having fun, and I am having fun. While I'm doing this, I do want to thank a couple of people. I do want to thank my family for this. This has been a tough year for all the artists. I've received a great deal of support from my parents, my family, my children. They're a blessing. My sweetheart, who is very, very supportive. I do want to thank all my friends from Armonk you guys are wonderful. Without everybody's support, I wouldn't be able to really do this. They give great advice, great guidance. So we got to be grateful for what we do have. I'm very thankful to my new friends I've made. All right, so I evolved it here. Now, if you notice in this one, in the reference, there really isn't a face. And for some reason, it bothered me that you can't tell really what it is. So I kind of finagle a face in there just so that we have a bit of a focal point, something that's not moving too much. And what I'd like to do is let's play around with the charcoal powder. Yes, it is messy.
How do you clean up afterwards? How do you clean up your space?
Clean up the space. Are you kidding me? I have the tendency to be kind of neat about how I work. When I went to school of visual arts, and I had this wonderful painting teacher who would see me paint. We had life painting, 4 hours of painting. And he would look at me, he would always say, like, how come you don't have any paint on your clothes? So I try not to be too messy because it also, cleaning up takes a lot of time. And artists realize that time is something that is very precious to us. We need to be producing. But I do clean up after all this is done. There's some residue here. I do wipe everything down, use the vacuum cleaner, etc.
I guess that was a question from all the moms who are watching.
All right, so that's how I could use the powder. The powder tends to be a little too loose. I can't get it dark enough. So I usually use this piece of hard charcoal. And I do go in heavy on this. And I do love this because it's just, you'll see the difference. And when I do the other drawings, I sometimes work this black away from the figure, not close enough. But once I'm done with the figure, then I start working in on the edges. So if you can see the difference, I can really go super black with that. And depending on the edges, if I want them hard or soft, I can just stop there. And then if I want them really hard, I would use a pencil to get closer. And then I would just, pencil. Then I would work out towards the black edge. So on average, one of these large 22 by 30 drawings could take me a week to render. it could take me a few hours, 4 or 5 hours, to come up with a concept on the computer, because that's constantly evolving, cropping.
Do you
So
work
it is.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. So it is. It does take a long time to do one of these large drawings, especially on white paper, because I can't erase, or I won't erase. So I need to preserve that whiteness, that crisp whiteness, as much as I possibly can. Go ahead, Susan.
Do you work on several pieces at the same time?
Yes, because I get bored very quickly, unfortunately. If I work for 3-4 hours on one piece, and I know I said this, you can meditate, but 4 hours of meditation is not my idea of spending a good day. So I have one of these going, and then another one ready to start. So it's almost like composting, I guess. You know, you just have 3 bins. You start on one, and well, that one's cooking. You start another one, so on. Then towards the end, you wind up having 2, 3, 4 pieces done almost simultaneously, which I actually get a big kick out of that. All right, we're almost done with the session, but I just want to do one little thing here. I want you to focus on her eye. And I just make it a little bit darker than anything else that's highly contrasting. So this is pretty much how I do my work. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have more questions that we cannot or did not cover during the event this morning, please reach out to me at www.luisfineart.com. That's www.luisfineart.com. I have more paintings and drawings available on my website. I enjoy doing this, and just before we go, just give you one last look at
Thank
my
you, Louis.
booth.
It's Anne. Thank you. I was just going
Thank
to
you.
ask you if you could slowly take us through your display for the people who maybe missed it in the very beginning.
Sure. This is a 22 by 30 drawing, charcoal, called Solaris 1. This is a transparent watercolor, 7 by 10 inches. Another transparent watercolor, 7 by 10 inches. Flamenco drawing, this one's called Ritual Fire Dance number 7. This is Arabian number 4. This is white charcoal on blackboard, 16 by 20. The piece on top is Repose, is graphite on white paper. It's 16 inches by 40 inches. The watercolor on the bottom, Privileged Food number 1. It is 20 inches by 41 inches, transparent watercolor. It is 11 inches by 30 inches, transparent watercolor. Farnese Barn Door number 2. And for the sake of time, let's just call this an elephant and not the original title, which takes about 5 minutes. This is like the Arabian horse number 4, white charcoal on blackboard. And thank you, everybody. Anne, Susan, thank you so much.
Beautiful.
This has been a
Thank you
privilege.
so much. It was just wonderful. And I think the beauty of a program like this is we can appreciate your work even more, understanding more about the process. So it was just terrific. Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the show.